the position after c4 e6, g3 d5, bishop g2, and specifically about continuations where black avoids knight f6 and bishop e7, which is a separate video, and where he avoids setups with c5 that lead to typically to the Tarrasch defense of the Queen's Gambit. This is also a separate video. So what are we dealing with here in this video? Mostly continuations where black takes on c4. He can do that right here, or one move later after knight f6 and knight f3 are inserted. This line enjoys a very solid reputation, so we can't expect to get a huge advantage, but I think we can set some quite nice problems for black. What else does he have besides the capture? A couple of things will transpose. If we start with the moves that make us happy, f5 transposes to a Dutch setup. This is dealt with in a separate video about c4, f5. Another move that probably will transpose is c6. I mean, transpose to something that we have looked at earlier. c6, we go knight f3, and if black takes on c4, which is the most critical, then we transpose to something that we have looked at after c4, c6, g3. If black does not, oops, that was a misclick, if black does not take here after c6, knight f3, we will again mostly transpose. Something like knight f6 is something that we look at later. Something that does not transpose is the move g6. That looks a little bit odd, but it's not that bad. I've played this myself on occasion in mostly rapid chess and blitz chess. Knight f3, bishop g7. Black just wants to fianchetto. We castle, and now black has a choice between knight f6 and knight to e7. In both cases, natural development is enough. We don't need to know anything specific. After knight f6, I recommend d4. If black takes, we will always get it back with the check. Castles, knight c3. Again, the capture is not going to lead to black holding this pawn. Knight e5 or queen a4 will get it back. So usually black just holds the center with something like knight bd7, and now I think white has a slight advantage with any normal move. Bishop f4, queen b3, yeah, let's say queen b3, and a later rook d1, maybe prepare e4 later. White should be a little bit better here. It's a pretty obscure line. A bit more common is knight e7. Again, we play d4, and black now usually opts for a setup with a quick knight b to c6, putting pressure on this. So for example, we have castles, queen c2, knight c6, and e3. This is a move to remember. We should play with e3 here to make sure that this is well protected. There is some pressure on this pawn. The setup that we're going for will be like rook d1 and b3. Black can play a5 here or b6. In both cases we play rook d1 and b3. So something like this, rook d1 and b3. I think white has a slight edge here without any specific problems. On the other hand, it is a complicated position and something that black can definitely play if he wants something unconventional. This, for example, has been played in a game Giri with white against Kasimdzhanov, and as mentioned, I think white is slightly better. G6 is an independent option, as is d4. After d4, black grabs space here in the center, and it will be some kind of reverse Benoni. Knight f3, and now black has a choice. He can play with c5 or without c5. Let's say knight c6. This would be playing without c5. We should play castles, knight f6, and d3. Yeah, it's a Benoni with probably long-term two tempi up. We are white. This is the first tempi, and the second one is e6, e5, which is probably going to come at some point. Bishop e7, for example, and now something like knight a3 and knight c2 is a good idea. We are going to be able to play a later b4. Note that this slow b3, a3 is usually the right approach. Something like a3 can be answered with a4, which is not so comfortable. More often than not, black plays with c5, get more support to the center. I would suggest just to go e3 and go into a modern Benoni now with reversed colors. Yeah, something like this looks very logical. Again, we are white, this is the first tempi, and black has a pawn on e6, he cannot go to e5 in one move. Bishop d6 was played here quite often, and now knight a3 is what I'm going to recommend. An interesting game here went like this: e5, c5. This is a game Giri against Wesley So, where Giri got a nice position. He sacrificed his pawn with c5, but is going to get it back here later on e5. So we got this in the mentioned game, and white had a very nice position, fantastically strong bishop. This is going to have a good square as well, and the rook is also quite active. So we can be quite happy with this, I think. I'm not a huge fan usually of the Benoni with reversed colors, but in this case we are almost like 2 tempi up, and this is quite nice. Okay, let's go back to position on move 3. The most respectable move here is to capture on c4. I mean, besides knight f6, which is the main move, but the capture. This is going to be, in most cases, just a transposition to the capture on c4 one move later with knight f3 and knight f6 inserted. I recommend to play queen a4, get the pawn back immediately. Knight a3 is an interesting alternative, which has been suggested by Grandmaster Marine in his books. I don't like it so much, as I mentioned already in the intro video. I think I don't really see much point in getting such a bad pawn structure early on. White has some dynamic ideas, of course, but still, I'm not a fan of this. So queen a4 check is the solid move. Yeah, now black has to break this check somehow. Most of the time he plays c6 on knight to d7. The move bishop d7 is not very critical. We take on c4. Now bishop c6 is going to be played, and we are happy after knight to f3 because we will get a very nice center later. Black has blocked his c-pawn, and later on we play queen c2, knight c3, d3, e4, and so on. We'll get the center. We'll see something similar in a line a little bit later with knight f3, knight f6 inserted, which would very likely transpose. So after queen a4, knight d7 and c6 are the main moves. Let's start with c6. We take on c4, and he plays b5. Here, white, theoretically speaking, can take on c6, win a pawn, but please don't do that. And this bishop on g2 is our best piece, and we don't want to trade it against a knight on b8. So we should move the queen, and it's important to remember that we always go to b3 in all lines, basically, when we are kicked with b5. The reason is that on c2 the queen doesn't do all that much, and quite often will be harassed by later rook c8 and then c5. Queen b3 is also tactically more interesting, as we will see in a couple of lines later. Yeah, bishop b7 now for black. We develop knight to d7. Black, of course, can play knight f6 here at any point, which would transpose to the capture on c4 on move 4. This is something we check later. The only independent option here is when black tries to delay this knight f6 move, and this can indeed play a role here. I suggest to play the move knight e5 here. If white doesn't do that, then c5 will give black a pretty easy equality. Something like this is what I'm talking about. This is not leading to anything. So I suggest to play knight e5, immediately attacking the structure. The only move that gives this some independent flavor now is the move knight to e7. Okay, we castle, knight f5, and rook to d1. Yeah, I think that white has a slightly better position here, but this is still an interesting one for black to play. He should probably take and play queen to b6. Now white has a choice. the move recommended by the engines is a move that takes a little bit of an unbiased approach to chess. Bishop to e3. A little bit of a shocker, but it leads to an interesting position. Takes, takes, and the engine claims that white is better. This is possible, really. I'm not totally sold on this, but I think engine might be right. Okay, we get a triple pawn, and we get to e4, we get to d6. Still, the pawn structure is very compromised, so I understand if you are a bit skeptical about this. If this is the case, the move knight d2 is also completely okay. It's a rare line anyway. So back to the check on a4. That was c6, and more common maybe is knight to d7. It's a close call. Yeah, we take the pawn, of course, and at any moment basically black can play knight f6. Here, for example, knight f6, and we play knight f3, and we transpose to the line with the capture on move 4. This is going to be examined later. In fact, here black most of the time will transpose. If he does not want to do that, he usually goes with c5 here immediately. We go knight f3, and again knight f6 is a transposition and probably the best move. Black has tried other things, for example the move b6. b6, however, can be met favorably with the tactically focused move knight d4. We attack the rook, and the only reason why this is playable in the first place for black is the move knight to e5, attacking the queen. We have a good reply, however, with knight c6. It's a pretty funny looking line. White is a bit better. Takes, takes. The rook on a8 is attacked, so it has to move, and we drop back to c6. Now black uses this pin with bishop b7. Our bishop here is not hanging, which we should stop with castling. Now the rook is attacked for real, and it has to cover the a pawn. White is a bit better in this position. After d3, knight d6, d4, the position is going to open up favorably for white. He either gets to take here with a pretty weak c-pawn, or black will capture himself, and then after knight d4, takes, takes, white has a slight advantage. The reason is that we are quicker on the c and d file, we are better developed, and very important, the c6 square is severely weakened. I think in this position, if black would still have his pawn back on b7, the position would still be quite okay. Not great, but quite okay. With this weakness, white has some advantage. That was the somewhat questionable move b6. a6 is also possible. This is very comparable to the lines with knight on f6. Again, we play queen b3. This is something that I have mentioned. We should often step out of b5 with the tempo. Now we are ready to answer b5 with knight d4, and black certainly regrets his decision. Better is the move b8 here, to try to prepare b5, but white is better after the simple move d4. We open up the center now. I think this compares very favorably to a Catalan. The move rook b8 now often runs into tempi, and all in all, black's development is not great. There's a game Wang Yue with white against Alexei Barsov, where Barsov took on d4 and played knight to c5. After queen d1, simple retreat, white was better. Barsov tried d3, but after knight c3, white could have had a really good advantage. Just develop quickly. This is a fantastic development here that white has. If black is now greedy, takes another pawn, then white's position becomes overwhelming. There's bishop f4 and rook d1, and well, black has no development. So this cannot be a particularly good idea. The best way for black to play all this is to play a quick knight f6 somewhere and transpose to the main lines, let's say, that we are going to look at in just a couple of moments. So these are the options on move 3. Most common move is knight f6, and it's of course very natural. Yeah, we go knight f3. Important to mention, the move knight c3 is, as so often, not a good idea when there is a supported pawn on d5. Black will go here and our knight doesn't find a good destination. So just knight f3. Yeah, again, black now has a pretty wide choice. c5 can be played, leads to the Tarrasch after cd5. Bishop e7 is the most frequently played move. This is a separate video, as mentioned, the video right after that. What else can black do? The capture on c4, as mentioned, is an option. c6 is also possible, where black tries for some setup with knight bd7 and possibly bishop to d6. Here white can play d4 right away, leading to a Catalan opening, or you can play with b3. This is also quite good. Bishop d6, bishop b2, and now d4. That also would probably technically belong to a Catalan. We should play d4 to make sure that black is not going to play e5. Yeah, here white always is a bit more comfortable. We play, black can play rook e8, knight bd2, and now there's e5 and b6. Against b6 we play for e4 ourselves with a typically slight advantage, with a better center and a good play for white. Can also go e5, black player trying to open up his bishop on c8. Here white is also better. Something to remember here is that after all those trades, the move knight f3 and then knight d4 is not bad, but even better is knight to c4. The idea is that after knight c4, rook e8, white has the move knight to e3, and in modern chess, attacking the isolated pawn is widely recognized as stronger than just blockading it. Here in fact we do both. We blockade with the queen and attack it with knight and bishop. White is very comfortably better here. Black of course can also play c6 here and now play some bishop e7. This is looked at in the next video. Yeah, those bishop e7 c6 setups. White setup is not going to be much different anyhow. So what is the main continuation? The capture on c4. By the way, what I should mention, it's d4 is again possible, of course, but again after e3 we get to something that we have seen earlier with this even earlier d4 push. Okay, so d takes c4. This is the main continuation, and my recommendation is to play queen a4, get the pawn back. As mentioned, white can go knight a3 here, as suggested by Marine. He has other moves. An interesting move, by the way, is castles, which is also quite popular. However, I think that, we have to play queen a4 anyway and move earlier, so I wasn't sure why to do something else here. In particular because, castles is interesting, but it is not necessarily better than the check. So let's just check and get the pawn back. The move bishop d7 is not very frequently played, but a bit better than the move on the earlier move. White will take, and now if he goes bishop c6, we have the same scenario that we have described just a couple of minutes ago. White will get a nice center here. Note that he takes a bit of time to occupy it, but he gets it in a very reliable way. This is a very stable center now. Yeah, white is just better in this position. Bishop d7, however, is not that bad because black also has the move c5. This is surprising. It looks a bit strange that black would open up everything here, but after knight e5, queen c8, he has a quite decent position. He covers his pawn and is ready for knight c6. Yeah, a typical continuation is castles, knight c6, knight takes, queen takes, and knight c3. In a position like this, we can forward a couple of moves. White, I think, is very slightly better due to the bishop pair. However, black is very solid. This is a game Nakamura Elyanov World Cup in Baku, I think 2015. Yeah, we always have hopes here because of the bishops, but black is quite solid. After all, this is a very decent opening, yeah, e65. We cannot expect to have an overwhelming advantage if black plays a good line. More popular after queen a4 are c6 and knight bd7. Let's start with c6. We take here b5, queen b3. Again, we go to b3 here in basically all cases. Bishop b7, castles, knight d7, a4, d4. I think very logical play by both sides. Black now mostly chooses between bishop to e7 and a6. Both moves can easily transpose into one another, and our play against both of them will be quite similar. Let's look at bishop e7 first. We go knight e5. This is a key move. We open up this diagonal as quickly as possible and make sure that c6, c5 is not going to be played anytime soon. Yeah, black usually now takes on e5. That knight is just too annoying. If he doesn't do that, play something like queen to b6, we have a good reply with bishop e3. This is a useful move anyway, and we have this d5 idea now. So black will usually move the queen again. This is why queen b6 is not a good idea. Something like this, we take and just develop with knight d2. Here white has a slight advantage at least. I mean, I think it's quite easily imaginable that white has a bigger advantage soon. Thing is, c5 will be difficult for black to play here, and if he does not manage that, his game is pretty rotten. Yeah, white is better here in some way. Usually black takes here. I think this is the better move. White takes, and black has to choose between knight d5 and knight d7. Let's have a look at some examples. Knight d7, we're going to develop castles. Taking on e5 is extremely risky. We'll see some of that in a later continuation with a6. Rook d1, queen c7, bishop f4. Yeah, white is just better developed here and enjoys this space advantage based on the pawn on e5. We are following a game Sargsyan and Huska. Rook f d8, queen c2, queen b6, knight e4, and white was a bit more comfortable, more space and ideas on d6. You can also sometimes jump to g5 or play bishop g5 to trade off this bishop. The move knight e5 I think is a bit more conservative, but also a little bit better for white after knight c3 and the capture here. Yeah, this is a game Anand with white against Georg Meyer. I think it was a blitz game, but still we can use this as a reference. After a4, the former world champion was slightly better. He's got pressure on those black pawns, and this vis-a-vis is quite annoying. A bit more popular, if we jump back, then this Lord Bishop e7 move is a6. Yeah, a6 is preparing c5 immediately. Quite often black tries to take on c5 in one go, for example. This is why a6 is played more often. We don't care much, we just go knight e5 anyway. The move queen b6 now, again, I think is not a good idea. We play bishop e3 and are happy. There is a game between Carlsen and Nakamura, where Nakamura went c5 here. But after knight takes d5, Carlsen had a very comfortable position. Now Nakamura played the pretty bad move e5, and after a4, white already had a huge advantage. Yeah, something like this happened, not something like this happened, I'm sorry, and white was a lot better. Carlsen had a crushing victory there over Nakamura. We can always be happy to see that queen b6 idea. I think after bishop e3, white has gained something. It's better for black to just take this knight. We recapture, of course, and now there's the choice again, d5 or d7. Again, knight d7, let's have a look. We develop, and here's the moment to show why grabbing on e5 is too dangerous. For example, here after bishop f4 and rook d1, white has a fantastic initiative here for the pawn. Let's look at a sample line. Queen c8, bishop g5, it threatens rook to d8, say f6, and here white already can go to sacrificial mode with knight e4. This position is already losing for black. Yeah, sounds a bit drastic, but this is really what it is. If you have some doubts, get this position and put it on the computer. It's fun to try to defend it with black. You're not going to have yeah, any success, I think. Yeah, taking on e5 is just a lot risky. Black usually goes queen to c7. This is far more prudent. We go bishop f4 and c5. This is more logical for black. Our choice is knight e4, trying to play the knight to d6. Yeah, and here I believe white is better. After knight takes e5, he plays a4 and opens up the queen side. This is very strong for white. After b4, white now had a very strong continuation in the game Agrest against Grondelius. I think I mentioned before that Agrest is a good player to study for the English. Here, however, he could have played better than in his game. a5 was strong, intending queen a4, spoiling black's castling rights. White is a lot better in this position. Yeah, in fact, after knight e4, black already has to take, bishop takes, and after rook c8, the move queen a3 is an important improvement over Masiecha Kovalyov. White just is a bit better in those positions. It's also, I think, quite comfortable to play. So knight d7, I have my doubts. I think knight d5 is probably a bit more solid. And again, we play knight c3 and attack this knight. Now rook d1 is very similar to the game that we've seen earlier, Arnold Meyer. An alternative is knight e4, queen c7 and knight d6, immediately sacking a pawn. Yeah, after this and rook d1, yeah, e4, rook d1, white has very good compensation for this pawn. It's a game Marletin Judin. Yeah, white got very good play here on the dark squares. So you have a good alternative there between this option or playing in style of this Arnold Meyer game. That would be rook d1 and take on d5. Yeah, e takes d5, e4 is opening the position favorably. cd5, bishop e3 with rook c1 to come, and a slight advantage because of this pretty bad bishop. So I think after c6 white has good chances for a slight pull. Knight d7 is more frequently seen, after which we take, and black usually goes c5. After a6, it's important to remember that we go back to b3 voluntarily. The queen is best placed there anyway, and we need to be ready to answer c5 here with a4. What white wants to try to do is always clamp down on the queen side with a5. If he manages to get this in, he will be slightly better. We can look at some sample lines, something like this, for example. Let's go ahead a couple of moves. Here white is better. This a5 pawn severely limits black on the queen side. We have b4 later, we have knight d2 to c4, which is a good square now. And whenever black plays the b pawn, we will take en passant and have two weak pawns to attack on a6 and c5. This is the setup that we go for. Alternatively, bishop d6. Yeah, just a very similar development. It's just that we have to remember this kind of setup. Here we see what I have described earlier, the split pawns. White is always a bit better due to the structure. A bit more precise is the immediate c5, after which again we play queen to b3 and ask black about his setup. It will usually look like this: rook b8, we go a4, preventing any b5, and again if he goes a6, we go a5. b6 is what black usually does, and we play d3, bishop d6 and knight to a3. This is a good move. We threaten this with a double attack. Yeah? So black has to react to this, a6, and we put our knight on c4 and now just develop. Yeah, this is the typical position that arises if black has played the most precise move order. Here I think black is reasonably okay. I still would prefer white a little bit, and I can show you one or two ideas. But black is in general quite okay here. E4 is an idea that takes control over the important d5 square, and the further plan would be to play like this. Yeah, opening up the position here, and with e4